When most people picture the fall of Rome, they imagine shouting barbarians at the gates, broken legions, and poisoned emperors collapsing beside marble fountains. But empires rarely die in a single strike. They erode from the inside, slowly, quietly, until the center can no longer hold. And the poison that seeps deepest is almost always money. Rome did not vanish only because of invasion or corruption. It withered because its currency lost meaning. The story of that collapse is not just ancient history, it is a warning still humming beneath every modern economy that believes it can deceive its own citizens and escape the cost. For centuries, the empire's strength was struck into metal, the silver denarius. First minted a little more than 200 years before Christ, it gleamed with purity and trust. Soldiers received it as proof of service. Merchants accepted it as proof of honesty. Families stored it as proof that tomorrow would still exist. The coin was more than payment. It was faith made visible. As long as Romans believed in their empire, they believed in its coin. But belief alone could not build roads or feed armies. An empire consumes wealth as surely as it collects it. Legions had to be paid, borders defended, aqueducts repaired, and endless wars financed. By the 2nd century after Christ, those costs had begun to drown even the vast Roman treasury. So the emperors reached for an old and dangerous trick: debasement. Instead of raising taxes, which invited rebellion, they quietly diluted the silver content of the denarius. A small change at first. Under Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, the coin was almost pure silver. 200 years later, during the rule of Caracalla, its heart was half bronze. By the middle of the 3rd century, under Gallienus, barely one coin in 20 parts was real silver at all. The rest was wash and illusion. People noticed, they always do. The weight felt wrong, the shine too bright. Traders demanded more coins for the same goods. Prices rose not because greed had grown, but because trust had shrunk. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius soon required handfuls. Soldiers demanded higher wages, merchants refused cheapened coins, and villagers reverted to barter. The empire's lifeblood, trade, began to clot. The emperors responded with more of the same. Each new ruler hoped quantity would disguise loss of quality, but inflation feeds on denial. The more coins they minted, the less each one meant. Rome entered a spiral that historians later called the crisis of the 3rd century. Between the years 235 and 284 after Christ, chaos ruled. Plagues thinned the population. Civil wars tore provinces apart. Emperors rose and fell faster than statues could be carved of them. Behind the spectacle was an empty treasury and a worthless coin. Farmers abandoned their fields rather than pay taxes in devalued currency. Trade routes crumbled. Markets turned to silence. The government tried desperate measures: price controls, forced labor, compulsory production. But the disease lay in the money itself. When value dies, law cannot resurrect it. One emperor, Diocletian, tried to halt the free fall. In the early years of the 4th century, he issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the cost of over 1,000 goods, from wheat to wages, under threat of death. But price cannot be commanded when trust has already fled. Markets went underground, a black economy thriving where the official one collapsed. The lesson was brutal and simple: a decree cannot make a broken coin whole. At last, the old currency was abandoned. Around 312 after Christ, Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a gold coin of consistent purity. It brought brief stability, especially in the Eastern Empire that would later be called Byzantine. Yet for the West, it was too late. The hollowing had already reached the core. Without faith in its money, Rome could no longer feed its armies or fund its trade. Roads decayed, borders blurred, and the empire that once spanned the known world began to unravel strand by strand. The fall of Rome was not a thunderclap, but a slow collapse of trust. Its coins still bore the faces of emperors, but their shine hid emptiness. Currency decay was only one thread in the grand tapestry of decline, but it was the sharpest, cutting through the illusion of permanence. The lesson, if you listen closely, still echoes through time. When money loses truth, everything built upon it, laws, armies, empires, follows soon after. Centuries passed, but the pattern never vanished. Every empire that thought it could cheat arithmetic eventually met the same end. After the Great War in the early 20th century, Germany faced reparations it could never truly pay. The government turned to paper, printing marks by the billions, convinced it could erase debt with ink. By the autumn of 1923, a loaf of bread cost more than 200 billion marks. Families carried wages home in wheelbarrows. Pensions evaporated overnight. Banknotes that once meant safety became scraps of color fluttering in the wind. Inflation didn't just destroy savings, it destroyed belief. When money stops meaning anything, chaos rushes in to fill the void. Out of that void, extremism found its voice. The road from hyperinflation to dictatorship was not long. It was paved with worthless paper. Rome had watched silver vanish from its coins. Germany watched trust vanish from its society. Decades later, another echo sounded farther south. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe repeated the old ritual of denial. Facing shrinking harvests and rising debt, its rulers printed money faster than crops could grow. By 2008, prices doubled every day. A cup of coffee cost more in the morning than at noon. Shops stopped changing price tags because the numbers blurred into absurdity. Eventually, the nation abandoned its own currency, trading instead in American dollars and South African rand. A government had once again tried to command value by decree and lost. Different continents, different centuries, the same arithmetic. Reality cannot be bribed. Even in places untouched by such extremes, the Roman pattern lingers like a ghost. In the early 1970s, the United States severed the last link between its currency and gold. President Nixon's decision ended the dollar's tangible anchor, turning it into what economists call fiat money, value sustained only by trust. From that moment, the temptation to spend beyond limits became irresistible. Debt ballooned. Budgets swelled. The money supply grew until the numbers no longer felt real. Over the decades, prices crept upward, quietly shaving meaning from every dollar. A bill looked the same in your hand, yet it bought less with each passing year. $1 in 1971 now buys what requires more than 6. Coins jingled with the same weight, but their spirit had thinned. Governments learned to disguise the erosion. They called inflation growth. They celebrated rising wages even as living costs outpaced them. They framed debt as investment, even when it funded mere consumption. They pointed to booming stock markets as proof of national wealth, though most citizens own no stocks at all. It was an elegant illusion, modern emperors playing the same old game with new tools. But today, the scale is no longer imperial or national. It is planetary. The world runs on paper promises and digital entries, on central banks willing to conjure trillions at the first hint of crisis. Every nation is Rome now, minting trust instead of silver. And as before, the burden falls not on those who write the rules, but on those who live beneath them. The workers, the savers, the pensioners whose earnings dissolve quietly in the tide of inflation. The pattern endures because it flatters power. Printing money feels like control, it delays pain, it buys applause. But every postponed reckoning gathers interest. Rome's rulers learned it when their silver turned to dust. We may learn it when our screens display numbers that no longer correspond to anything real. So what lessons survive the ruins? First, inflation is not an accident. It is policy, an invisible tax that spares no empire for long. Second, real wealth is never paper. It is what remains valuable when paper burns. Land, skills, tools, enterprises that produce, not just promise. And third, stability is never guaranteed. The Romans of the first century would have laughed at the idea that their coins could become worthless. The Germans of 1913 would have mocked the thought of wheelbarrows full of cash. The Zimbabweans of the 1980s believed independence would mean prosperity. Each believed their money eternal. Each was wrong. History's rhythm is steady. Collapse begins slowly, then arrives all at once. When money stops being real, contracts fade, trade freezes, armies scatter, governments lose their voice. The barbarians at the gate may deliver the final blow, but the true assassin sits in the treasury. That is Rome's final whisper to the modern world. The fall of empires begins with the fall of trust. If silver can rot, so can digits. And though history never repeats, it rhymes with cruel precision. Ignore the lesson, and it will teach you again until you finally listen.